These are all the books that I read for February. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Liberty, and I just want to first say thank you, a huge thank you to anyone that has subscribed to my channel already. I believe I already have 14 subscribers, and I cannot even tell you how excited that makes me feel. Don't worry, I'm not looking to retire off this channel. This is a pure passion project for me. I love anything bookish. I love this community so much, and I just want to thank you. If you're new here, my name is Liberty, and I love anything book related and book journaling, and so let's just continue with the content. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I read for the month of February. I felt like I had a stunning reading month. I really enjoyed all the books that I read. I'm excited to talk about them today, and hopefully you get inspired to maybe pick one up for yourself. One of the first books I read was Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman, and this is the second installment of the Arc of a Scythe series. I am truly enjoying this series so much. If you are not familiar with this story, in Scythe, the first book, you're introduced to a dystopian future where people cannot die. All illnesses and injuries have cured, and so you cannot die. So what eventually happens is that the world becomes more and more populated. So there is an elite group of people who call themselves Scythes, and they belong to a Scythedom, and they are revered by a lot of people. Then we're introduced to the main characters, Citra and Rowan, and they actually become Scythe apprentices. And throughout their apprenticeship, they realize there is a group of Scythes that kind of kill people, or glean as they call them in the book, in a very unethical way. And I know this kind of goes against, ethics in general, like killing people in the future, but it's the only way to kind of keep the population down. And Scythes are supposed to do it in kind of an ethical way. And it's understood on the planet that this needs to happen to maintain sustainability. As they realize that a certain group of Scythes are going rogue and gleaning people the way they want to, it has become intolerable for Citra and Rowan, and they try to intervene. Now in the second book, Thunderhead, think of the Thunderhead like an iCloud, but 10 times more advanced. It sees everything on the planet and knows everything about everyone, and it will alert people if there's a fire or anything kind of bad going on the planet. But the only problem is there is an understanding that the Thunderhead cannot interfere with the Scythedom. So what happens in this book is that the Thunderhead becomes more and more aware, and it starts to interfere and intervene in a way, and it has a more active role to change the course of events. But as the Thunderhead becomes more and more involved, it risks losing the trust of humanity, and there's a question whether or not the Thunderhead's doing more harm than good. This book is amazing. I'm loving this book in this series so much so far. It is fast-paced. These are quick reads. Although they are large books overall, I read these in like 2 or 3 days. There's tons of action, there's tons of plot twists, and it kept me completely engaged. I think the world building in this book is completely phenomenal. And in this book, it has a great emphasis about the world of the Scythedom. Overall, I think this is an excellent sequel, and it continues to build on the themes of the first book, while overall adding more intriguing layers and complexity to the story. I love this book. I highly recommend this. I gave this a 5-star. This one it knocks it out of the park for me. The next book that I read is I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban, by Malala Yousafzai. I already knew a lot of her story, so I wanted to see if there's anything else within this book that I maybe didn't learn before. And if you're not familiar with her, she is a young Pakistani activist who became more famous as she was standing up for women's education in Pakistan. And she actually survived a Taliban assassination as she was shot in the head. The story opens up when she explains her childhood living in the Swat Valley in Pakistan, where she grew up in a family that really valued education, especially her father. She goes into great detail about describing her father's efforts to build a school in Pakistan so young women could get educated, which ultimately drew the attention of the Taliban. And despite the attempt on her life and being shot in the face by the Taliban, ultimately she went on to become a global symbol for peace, and she was the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. There are a ton of trigger warnings in this, all of them across the board, but I did find this very powerful, very moving, completely inspiring. And I love that we catch glimpses of the Pakistani culture in the society within Pakistan and the overall history of Pakistan itself. And she highlights the geopolitical unrest. So I do recommend this book too. I felt the book at times was kind of dry and it dragged on at certain times. I wouldn't give this a 5-star personally for me, and I feel bad saying that, I'm just being honest. I would probably give this more of a 3-star. But overall, I love the overall story, but I did find it a little dry in certain areas, but I still think it's worth a read. The next book that I read, I don't know how I heard about this book, no idea, but I loved it. I read it in like 2 hours. The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly by Sun Mi Huang. I'm sure I said that wrong. But anyway, this book blew me away. I read it in like 2 hours. It's a very short book. It's like 133 pages, so it's very short, but very impactful. I could not believe how much this book has lingered with me since I read it. So in this book, you are introduced to an egg-laying hen. Her name is Sprout. She calls herself Sprout. In her mind, Sprout means the beginning of something, like something sprouting and becoming something new. She's stuck in a cage her entire life. She is cooped up and she's well past her prime. Her only goal in her entire life was to hatch an egg and raise her own chick. In the story, it is so heart-wrenching. She describes her coop. Wherever she lays her eggs, they fall on a platform that rolls away from her, so she can never even see her own eggs. So she spends her entire life watching her own eggs go away from her so the farmers can collect them and eat them. In a strange twist of events, she does become free, and ultimately she finds an abandoned egg which she hatches on her own. And then the story from there is heartwarming, it's heart-wrenching, and I completely fell in love with Sprout. This story through her eyes is beautiful. I think there's a huge lesson to learn about unconditional love. This story is completely about the heart of the soul, perseverance, parental sacrifice, belonging, having purpose, and ultimately love. This story was so good. I totally give this a 5-star. Completely worth a read. The next book that I want to talk about, I need to get it out of the way. It is so disturbing. I don't even know how to describe this book. I actually took a bunch of notes because there's so much to unfold with this book. And the book is Vonna by Otisha Moshfegh. Now, I read one of her other books. I believe she has 4 books out or 5. But I read her book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which I did like quite a bit. I love her writing style. This book, number 1, every trigger warning you can think about is in this book. I would say look them up. You have the sizzling of a placenta on a fireplace. You have intentionally swallowing a gray pubic hair, suckling on sheep, cannibalism, public disembowelment, murder, incest, rape, everything. Everything is in this book, and it's not a very long book, as you can see. And there's an image that she painted of a grape, which will haunt me for the rest of my life. Needless to say, this book is not for the faint of heart at all. It's extremely graphic, it's extremely upsetting and disgusting, and ultimately very disturbing. This book is said to be a medieval allegory about capitalism in a European fictional town called Vonna. In this story, you're following one of the main characters. His name is Merrick, and he was born to a very abusive father. He's also been told that his mother died during childbirth. His father is extremely abusive, and Merrick is completely disfigured, is being looked after by his abusive father named Jude, who has a sheep farm. He wants to feel that maternal love that he doesn't get from his father. He feels love from his father whenever he's being abused by him. And so throughout the book, he does things knowingly that would make his father upset, just so his father would maybe abuse him so he would feel love. And a woman named Ina. And in the book, she's kind of painted as kind of like the town's witch, the town's nursemaid. She's nursed most of the people in the town. And as she's much older, much older, Merrick still suckles on her. Although she has no milk to give, she's an old woman now, but that's how he feels maternal love. He actually suckles on sheep. There's also a lord of this town, and his name is William, and he lives on top of a hill that oversees the entire town. He has all the riches, very gluttonous, doesn't really do much to help the town below. Throughout some events in the book, Merrick ends up staying there and actually becomes William's son. And now Merrick is now starting to have all of those riches in his life that he has never had before. There's so much more to this story, but being such a short book, I don't want to give much of it away. Now, I'm still on the fence whether or not I actually like this book. When I first read it, I was like, absolutely not. This was just too weird, too out there. Every page you're like, what? What happened? More that it has sat with me. I really appreciate Atisha Mojfeg kind of going there. It's very disturbing, and the more that I sit with it, the more and more I'm actually appreciating the book that she wrote. I don't really know how I feel yet, but if you've read that, let me know what you felt about it, because this book, it's hands down the weirdest book I've ever read in my life. I don't think I'll be rereading it. This book was just weird. Now, the next book I read is the complete opposite of that. And this is The Office BFFs, Tales of the Office from Two Best Friends Who Were There by Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey. This was amazing. And I would say pair this with the audiobook as well, because it is narrated by these two women. In the book, you have all the wonderful pictures of their time on The Office. You guys, they have a wonderful podcast. I really love The Office. If you are an Office fan, you gotta get this book or listen to it. I think having both was really fun, because all the pictures in here, it's so much fun to see all the cast behind the scenes, and they really dive into their friendships and their hardships. And I laughed with this book. I cried. I thought this was such a great book. Hands down, this is one of my favorite books I'm going to read this year. This is so good. It's so heartwarming and fun. If you are a fan of The Office, you really need to get this book. Okay, so the next book, don't laugh at me. It is a play by William Shakespeare. It is A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, the reason why I've been more interested in reading Shakespeare is because one of my favorite books from last year, I read this last year, was If We Were Villains by M.L. I love this book so much. It is within this book, and I don't want to give away this book, I didn't read this book this year, but in that book you're following students who are also studying Shakespeare. Banter they have about Shakespeare for one another. I just fell in love with that world. It made me want to read Shakespeare. Now, A Midsummer Night's Dream, I thought this was going to be like a beautiful, atmospherical book. It wasn't. It was a comedy, which I'm actually surprised about. In fact, this was such a weird story that I kind of didn't like it. So this is a play that's set in ancient Athens, following the misadventures of a group of people. And eventually all their lives become oddly and weirdly entangled when they enter a forest inhabited by magical fairies. It was weird. It was okay. I mean, it's Shakespeare, right? It's Shakespeare. It's difficult to read and understand. I actually had to look at Cliff Notes to make sure what I was reading was real. Also, I would suggest if you are interested in reading Shakespeare, pair it also with the audiobook. The audiobooks for Shakespeare, some are really, really good. And they put inflection and tone on the play so you get a better understanding, like, is this something bad going on? They put music to it. So it just makes it a little bit easier to understand. I'm gonna read more Shakespeare. I wanna try to understand it a little bit more, but this is okay. It wasn't the book I thought it was going to be, but I'm glad I'm reading Shakespeare. I mean, it took me like an hour and a half to get through this book along with the audiobook, so it didn't take up a lot of my time. And the last book I read was Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. I love this book. I love this book so much. I mean, look, check out the cover. It looks like a little heart. This book was so good. It's been sitting on my shelf for a long time. And then when I did my February TBR earlier, I totally threw that out the window. I wasn't even thinking that it's the month of Valentine's Day, and I just didn't think of that. So I saw this book on my shelf. I'm like, I feel like I gotta read this in February. This is a gothic mystery romance set in the 19th century in Scotland. And one of the main characters, her name is Hazel. She's a young woman of privilege, and she's very intrigued with medicine and surgery. And this is during a time where women really didn't become educated. They certainly didn't become doctors and physicians and surgeons. And in her father's library, she started reading all these medical books about surgery. In fact, anytime she would find dead animals on her estate, she would do dissections on them and learn the anatomy. And even though she is being prepared to marry her cousin to keep the wealth in the family, she's dreaming of becoming a surgeon one day. She then learns of a prominent surgeon that is going to do a public autopsy. And to the chagrin of her future fiance, he was dead set against it. Does not feel like that is a place for a woman. So she decides to go anyway. And then enters Jack Courier. Jack Courier calls himself a resurrectionist. which is essentially a grave digger. He has been digging up graves after hours to give to the medical society and the anatomical society so they can perform experiments on bodies. She actually applies to medical school and she starts to attend classes dressed as a man. And although her professor saw that she was very smart and she was able to grasp medicine and surgery quite well, he agreed that she probably shouldn't attend classes as a woman, especially being unchaperoned. But he did have a deal with her. She was allowed to take the exam at the end of class, but she wasn't allowed to attend any classes. And Jack would dig up these bodies for her so she could learn anatomy, learn medicine that way. Love this book. Again, I thought this was very fast paced. I love the story. I work in medicine, so I just love this. I love that there's a woman in the 19th century who really wants to become a surgeon, and her relationships in this book become very complex, and how the story ends is beautiful and sad, and it's everything. I really enjoyed this book. I think it's totally worth a read. That's it, guys. Those are all the books that I read for the month of February. I hope you enjoyed this video. I think I'm just going to do my monthly wrap-ups. I don't think I'm going to do like a monthly TBR because that changes. That changes all the time. I never know what kind of books I'm going to want to read. I'm one of these people that just walks to my bookshelf and like, what am I in the mood for today? So I think I'm going to kind of get rid of the TBRs and just focus more on my monthly wrap-ups. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to get all cozy and get lost in the book. All right, guys, cheers.